Alright, I was poking around this week and stumbled onto something, as I'm kind of prone to do. Something I thought I knew the start of, and that's the competitive gaming scene. I think almost everyone's been kind of both delighted and dismayed to an extent at the rise of the competitive gaming scene. It started to show up on ESPN and other networks, bringing gaming more and more into the mainstream than it's actually ever been before, but it has come with some drawbacks, as games get designed more and more for the competitive landscape. The question is, did these kinds of things get their start in the early 2000s, like we all kind of remember them starting, or do they go back much, much further? Well, if you know me, you kind of know the answer to that. So let's take a look back in time to the very, very start of the competitive scene in gaming, what came after it, and talk about where it is today a little bit. Now, most of us have done some gaming somewhat competitively since the early 90s, or maybe even earlier with Atari, but most of us, I think, probably started out with Street Fighter II and other games when those hit the scene, competing with each other and maybe having some small local tournaments. However, this scene actually goes way, way, way further back than we all thought, all the way back to 1972. I know, I'm actually kind of shocked myself. I mean, the first video arcade game had only really come out in 1971, and we're already having tournaments in 1972? Well, the game isn't quite what you're thinking. You see, around this time there were two main games on the market. Computer Space, which came out in 1971, and Pong, which dropped in late 1972. The funny thing was it wasn't either one of these games. Nope, the game they played was none other than Space War. Often called the first video game, this game was actually designed from the ground up for two players, each controlling one ship, one known as the Needle and the other the Wedge, mostly named for their distinct ship designs. Players would stay in motion when not using thrust to simulate real space movement, and could use things like flying near a star to get a gravity-assisted movement boost. Ships could also move through hyperspace, which basically just moved them to a random location on the board. The idea was to destroy the other player with one of your missiles. They could also be destroyed by slamming into a star, or maybe another ship on the screen. But you can easily see where this could be set up to make a tournament by just how the game itself plays. The Rolling Stones magazine thought so too. Stuart Brand actually suggested the tournament that took place in Stanford's own artificial intelligence laboratory, hosting around 15 players who would compete to the bitter end for a whopping grand prize of a year subscription to Rolling Stones magazine. I know, not really glamorous or popular, however, it was a start and the very first tournament with the very first game for an actual prize worth money. Well, that was officially sponsored anyway, let's say. This wouldn't be the last early time these kinds of things were held. Another game came out later in 1980, and that was called Space Invaders. Actually, it was released in 1979. Now, this wasn't really a multiplayer game, but a single-player experience with a scoring system. Players would shoot the incoming alien invaders, with them getting faster and faster the more than the player took out. Comically enough, this mechanic was actually a mistake in the game design that was so engaging that it was left in as a feature. See, Microsoft's not the only person to have undocumented features in their software. This tournament was much, much larger, hosting a massive 10,000 people who participated from regions all around the United States. The prize on this one was rather vague, but it was rumored to be an arcade cabinet of Space Invaders. Not too shabby. Now fast forward to the 1990s and the rise of the internet, and we now have global communities competing in video games. This brought renewed interest in the competitive gaming scene, with organizations like Cyber Athlete Professional League, or CPL for short. Quake, Warcraft, and Counter-Strike started to be played at highly competitive levels. This would only ramp up in the 2000s and forward, prize pools starting to get larger and larger through the years, all the way to today where the industry is worth over $1 billion. For example, in 2022, the global esports scene was worth $1.45 billion and is projected to be worth $6.75 billion by 2030. We now play in a global space with companies vying to be the next big game in the gaming scene, dethroning the likes of Dota, Fortnite, and League of Legends in the esports space. And people watching, the audience is growing year after year, tuning in to see top players compete, hoping to see more moments like the Diego Perry from EVO of 2004. or Diego Umahara, parried 15 consecutive hits from Wong's Chun-Li super art with 1 health remaining.
On the verge of putting Diego down 1-0.
Going on to defeat Wong and ending up in the finals where he would eventually lose. However, what do you guys think of esports and the competitive scene in general? Have any of you competed in any of them, and if so, at what level? Do you like the directions games have taken to cater to this level of play? Let me know in the comments. While you're there, if I can ask you for one more favor, please leave this video a like, and if you haven't, consider following. That helps me out a ton. Also, thank you so much for making it this far in the video. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and until we meet again, happy gaming!